All right, buckle up for a deep dive, folks. Truth can be stranger than fiction, and today's case is going to prove it. We're looking into Robert Hansen, the butcher baker of Alaska. On the surface, a regular guy, baker, family man, but underneath, a serial killer. He turned the Alaskan wilderness into his own terrifying hunting ground. You sent us Hansen's Wikipedia page, focusing mainly on his crimes and his capture, so let's unpack it all. How did a seemingly ordinary guy go down such a dark path?
It's one of those classic double life cases. They always make you wonder, how well can you ever really know someone?
That's so true. Anchorage in the 70s and 80s, you don't exactly think serial killers, right? But that's where Hansen operated. So where do we even begin with a story this complex?
Well, Hansen's early life is key to understanding his trajectory. Born in Iowa in 1939, he had a really tough upbringing, domineering father, a severe stutter, and debilitating acne, all things that can leave some deep psychological scars.
It's like that sets him up for those feelings of inadequacy and isolation.
Right.
You see that theme over and over in serial killer profiles.
Yeah, very true. And in those early years, you often see hints of what's to come. Hansen had run-ins with the law as a teenager. Arson, petty theft. Not huge crimes, but definitely signs that something wasn't right.
So these weren't just teenage pranks, then there was like a darker element to it.
Exactly. Then there's his first marriage, and in divorce while he was in prison for arson. A pattern of instability emerges.
Okay, so troubled childhood, escalating criminal behavior, failed marriage. Then he moves to Alaska for a fresh start.
Right.
New wife, kids, a bakery. He even becomes this well-respected hunter. Sets records even. It's almost a complete turnaround.
And that's exactly what makes this case so fascinating and disturbing, too. This facade of normalcy is so typical of organized serial killers. They blend in seamlessly, while hiding this dark side.
It's like the wolf in sheep's clothing thing.
Yeah.
But eventually the mask always slips, right?
Always. And in Hansen's case, the cracks start to show with all these missing women in Anchorage. Sadly, many of them were sex workers or teenagers. Women who might not be immediately missed,
Vulnerable targets. And that probably played into his sense of power and control.
Right. Almost definitely. His M.O. was chillingly calculated. He'd stalk his victims, abduct them at gunpoint, take them back to his home, then he'd transport them out to these remote areas, where he would literally hunt them.
Chilling. That nickname, the Butcher Baker, that's where it takes on a whole new level of horrifying.
It's more than a catchy phrase. It speaks to the ritualistic nature of his crimes. This wasn't just about killing. It was about the thrill of the chase, exerting dominance.
So this wasn't a crime of passion. This was something way more calculated and sinister, like he was playing a game.
Exactly. And this pattern likely started long before it was even officially recognized. Celia Van Zanten, found frozen to death in 1980. She's believed to be one of his early victims. The circumstances of her abduction and the way her body was discovered, it all eerily echoes his later crimes.
So it's possible he was operating under the radar for years, before the authorities even caught on. Then comes Cindy Paulson. Talk about a turning point in this whole story.
Cindy's experience. One of those stories that makes you question how anyone could survive something like that. Abducted, tortured, driven to this remote airfield. She was convinced she was about to be murdered.
Sounds like a scene straight out of a horror film.
Yeah.
Hansen had her chained up in his basement, even took a nap while she was down there. But then, when he was loading up his plane...
Cindy, she was thinking on her feet, managed to escape from the car. Ran for her life.
Barefoot, too. Right, because she left her blue sneakers behind. Talk about a detail that sticks with you.
And that tiny detail ended up playing a huge role in the investigation later on. Cindy reported the crime immediately, provided crucial information about Hansen, his vehicle, everything.
It's hard to imagine the terror she must have felt, but her courage in that moment was incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. But while Cindy was reporting her ordeal, Detective Glenn Floth was working a separate case. A series of bodies found around Anchorage, seemingly unconnected. But with these disturbing similarities, he was starting to suspect a serial killer was at work.
And that's when he reaches out to the FBI, right? Brings in Special Agent John Douglas, one of the pioneers in the field of criminal profiling.
Yeah, that was a pivotal moment. Douglas, after reviewing the case files, he developed a profile. And it fit Hansen to a T, experienced hunter, low self-esteem, history of rejection by women, likely to keep souvenirs from his victims.
So the FBI profile was like a blueprint, pointing right at Hansen. But they still needed hard evidence to connect him to the murders.
And they found it. The search of Hansen's home turned up this chilling collection of items. Jewelry belonging to the victims, firearms, including the rifle used in the murders, and perhaps most damning of all, an aviation chart, with little X marks denoting burial sites.
Wait, he literally had a map of his crimes? That's meticulous and terrifying at the same time. Almost seems like something out of a movie.
It speaks to a very specific criminal mind, you know. The need for control extends way beyond the act itself. There's this compulsion to document, to catalog, to almost own the crimes.
Okay, so they've got this mountain of evidence, Cindy Paulson's testimony, and the FBI profile, all pointing to Hansen. What's his reaction when they confront him?
Denial, at first. But as the evidence mounted, that facade crumbled. He eventually confessed, revealed all these gruesome details of his crimes, even led investigators to more burial sites.
And this confession, it wasn't just some dry recounting of the facts, right? I remember reading that it offered some pretty disturbing insights into his psyche.
Absolutely. What's chilling is that even in his confession, there's this distinct lack of remorse. He tried to justify his actions, blamed the victims, portrayed himself as somehow wronged by these women.
It's that classic predator mentality, isn't it? Shifting the blame, dehumanizing the victims, makes it easier to live with the monstrous acts they've committed.
Exactly. And that lack of empathy, that inability to see his victims as human beings, it's a hallmark of so many serial killers. Allows them to compartmentalize, separate themselves from the horror of their actions.
Disturbing thought. Makes you wonder, was this all inevitable? Could anything have been done to prevent these tragedies? Were there signs that were missed?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? For the benefit of hindsight, we can see the red flags. The troubled childhood, the escalating criminal behavior, even the manic depression and schizophrenic episodes he was diagnosed with later on.
So his mental health played a role. It wasn't just a case of him being evil.
It's rarely ever that simple. Mental illness doesn't excuse his actions, obviously, but it adds another layer of complexity to understanding his motivations. How much did his conditions contribute to his crimes? Were they a driving force or more of a contributing factor? It's a question that's still debated.
It's like this tangled web, trying to separate nature from nurture, the impact of mental illness from individual choice.
Exactly. And the science of criminal profiling, it was still pretty new back then. Today, we might have a better understanding of how all these factors interplay. But back then, connecting those dots was incredibly difficult.
So even with some warning signs, it might have been tough to predict that he'd become a serial killer.
Exactly. No crystal ball. But what this case does highlight is the importance of continued research, education, and awareness. The more we understand about the factors that contribute to violent behavior, the better equipped we'll be to identify potential threats and intervene before tragedy strikes.
It's about prevention, not just punishment, trying to stop these things from happening in the first place.
Precisely. But let's not forget the victims. Each of those X marks on Hansen's chart represented a life stolen, a family devastated. He admitted to killing at least 17 women, but authorities believe the actual number could be much higher.
And to think, he was only formally charged with 4 murders because of that plea bargain. That's got to be incredibly difficult for the families of the victims, knowing he wasn't held accountable for every life he took.
It speaks to the complexities of the justice system. Sometimes, to secure a conviction and get information about other crimes, deals have to be made. But that doesn't lessen the pain for those left behind.
It's a reminder that closure can be elusive, even when justice is served. And in Hansen's case, even his cooperation in locating burial sites, it couldn't bring back the lives that were lost.
Absolutely. And that brings us to the impact of Hansen's crimes on the community. Imagine living in Anchorage during that time, knowing that a serial killer was operating right there in your midst. The fear, the mistrust, the shattered sense of safety.
It must have been terrifying. Every missing person's case, every unexplained disappearance, it would just fuel that anxiety.
And then the realization that this respected baker, this seemingly ordinary guy, was the monster they'd been searching for. That kind of revelation can shake a community to its core.
It makes you question everything you thought you knew about people.
It really does. And it underscores the fact that evil can lurk beneath the most unassuming facades. You can't always judge a book by its cover, you know.
It's a sobering reminder that, yeah, you can't always tell who's capable of such darkness. But even with all the horror of this case, there's also a story of incredible resilience. Cindy Paulson's escape. Her bravery didn't just save her own life. It was key in stopping Hansen's reign of terror.
Absolutely. Cindy's story is like this powerful testament to the strength of the human spirit. I mean, faced with that level of terror, she managed to think clearly, seize an opportunity, and ultimately bring a monster to justice.
It's amazing. She was chained up in his basement, certain she was going to die. And yet, when that chance to escape came, she was ready.
And her decision to report the crime right away, to give those details about Hansen and his vehicle, that was huge in connecting him to the other missing women.
It just shows you how one person's actions can have this ripple effect, right? Changing the course of events, potentially saving countless lives.
Yeah, without Cindy's bravery, Hansen might have kept operating undetected for who knows how long. Her testimony, the physical evidence, the FBI profile, they all came together to build this airtight case against him.
It's a good reminder that speaking up, even when it's terrifying, can make a world of difference. And that those who survive these kinds of things deserve our full support and belief.
Absolutely. Sharing her story must have been incredibly difficult for her. But it was vital in ensuring that justice was served.
And while Hansen's capture and imprisonment did bring some sense of closure, the scars of his crimes, they run deep, especially for the families of the victims.
It's true. Each of those women, they had a name, a story, a life that was cut way too short. And for those left behind, the grief and the unanswered questions, they can linger for years, decades even.
It's hard to imagine that pain, not knowing what happened to someone you love, and having to face this horrifying truth of their fate.
And even with Hansen's conviction, there's still this sense of injustice. He was only formally charged with 4 murders, all because of that plea bargain. Some families never got the full measure of justice that they deserved.
Yeah, it shows how the legal system, while aiming for fairness, doesn't always deliver that kind of emotional resolution that victims' families need.
And in a case like this, where so many lives were lost, where the details are so horrific, that sense of incompleteness can be really tough to bear.
This deep dive has taken us through some dark territory, from the depths of Hansen's depravity to the strength and resilience of his victims, and those who fought so hard to bring him down.
It's a story that stays with you, makes you think about the nature of evil, the complexities of human behavior, the fragility of life.
Well, it also offers a glimmer of hope, right? The courage of survivors like Cindy Paulson, the dedication of investigators like Detective Flo, the power of advancements in criminal justice like profiling.
And maybe most importantly, it reminds us to be vigilant, to pay attention to the people around us, to trust our gut when something feels off.
We can't always predict who's capable of evil, but we can work together to create a world where that kind of darkness is less likely to take hold.
Well said. If this deep dive has sparked your interest, I encourage you to dig a little deeper into this case, learn more about the victims, and explore the efforts being made to prevent similar tragedies. It's a journey that'll challenge you, inform you, and hopefully inspire you to make a difference out there. It really is true.
Makes you think, you know. We can't always tell who's capable of something like that. But even amidst all the horror in this case, there's a story of incredible resilience. Cindy Paulson's escape. Her bravery didn't just save her life, it was also instrumental in ending Hansen's reign of terror.
You're absolutely right. Cindy's story is such a powerful testament to the strength of the human spirit. Faced with unimaginable terror, she managed to think clearly, to seize that opportunity. And ultimately, she brought a monster to justice.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. Chained up in that basement, she was certain she was going to die. And yet, when that chance came, that chance to escape, she was ready.
And her decision to immediately report the crime, to provide all those details about Hansen and his vehicle, well, that was crucial in connecting him to all those other missing women.
It makes you realize that one person's actions can have this huge ripple effect, changing the course of events, potentially saving countless lives.
Without Cindy's bravery, Hansen might have continued to operate undetected for who knows how long. Her testimony, the physical evidence, the FBI profile, it all came together to create this truly airtight case against him.
You know, it's a good reminder for all of us. Speaking up, even when it's terrifying, can make a world of difference. And that survivors like Cindy Paulson deserve our unwavering support and belief.
Absolutely. Sharing her story, I'm sure, was one of the most difficult things she ever had to do. But it was absolutely vital in ensuring that justice was served.
While Hansen's capture and imprisonment did bring a sense of closure, the scars of his crimes run deep, especially for the families of the victims.
That's so true. Each of those women had a name, a story, a life, and their lives were cut tragically short. For the families they left behind, the grief, the unanswered questions, it can linger for years, decades even.
It's hard to even imagine that pain, you know, not knowing what happened to someone you love, and then having to face that horrifying truth of their fate.
And even with Hansen's conviction, there's still this lingering sense of injustice. I mean, he was only formally charged with 4 murders because of that plea bargain.
Yeah.
Some families never got the full measure of justice they deserved.
It shows how the legal system, you know, while it strives for fairness, it doesn't always provide that emotional resolution that victims' families need.
In a case like this, with so many lives lost, where the details are so horrific, that sense of incompleteness can be incredibly difficult to bear.
This deep dive has taken us through some really dark territory. The depths of Hansen's depravity, the strength and resilience of his victims, and those who fought so hard to bring him down.
It's a story that stays with you, that's for sure. Makes you really reflect on the nature of evil, the complexities of human behavior, and the fragility of life.
It's heavy stuff. But there's also that glimmer of hope, right? We see the courage of survivors like Cindy Paulson, the dedication of investigators like Detective Floff, the impact of advancements in criminal justice, like profiling.
And maybe most importantly, it reminds us to be vigilant, to pay attention to the people around us, and to trust our instincts when something feels off.
We might not always be able to predict who's capable of evil, but we can work together to create a world where that kind of darkness is less likely to take root. Well, folks, that's our deep dive into the chilling case of Robert Hansen, the butcher baker of Alaska. It's a story that forces us to confront the darkness that can exist even in the most ordinary seeming places, but it also reminds us of the incredible resilience of the human spirit, the importance of speaking out against injustice, and the power of hope even in the face of unimaginable tragedy. As always, we encourage you to learn more about this case, remember and honor the victims, and continue the conversation about how we can work together to prevent such horrors from happening again. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe out there.